Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowski, and back in action, Susan Hobson's here. Susan, how are you?
I am excellent. I feel so good. Let's go. Let's get this party started. You got to have a quote for us, though, right? Before we dive in.
Absolutely. And so
What do we got today?
I have one here from Leonard Sweet, and he says, the essence of leadership is relationships, influencing people to achieve things together that can't be achieved alone.
Mm. Tell us why you chose that one today, sir.
And that's one is it's the growth that many of us leaders go through, right? Is this element of being, you know, I'm alone, I'm trying to be the superstar individual contributor into
Mm-hmm.
now I'm leading teams and now I'm focusing on the team because they're ultimately the ones who are leading to my success as a leader. And then also because we have an incredible legacy league community going and where you can go and connect with other elite leaders out there, get content, join us live, ask Susan and I questions and the rest of the coaches at Elite. And really, also, which is an amazing free part of this, is the Legacy Factor mini program that we have up there so you can connect to your legacy. So we want you to get in there and start achieving the best that you can do. So elitehighperformance.com/legacy league. Now, we have a special guest with us today, the CEO and founder of Airspeed. And the description for Airspeed for folks is the easiest way to connect and celebrate your team, improve your team's happiness, engagement, and collaboration. We have the CEO and founder, Doug Campbell Johns, with us. Doug, how are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And maybe we'd love, before we get into you, what do you think about the quote?
I think the quote was spot on. I was just smiling and jotting it down as you were saying it, because that's that's been my experience as a CEO of multiple startups and a executive in large tech firms, and also kind of the mission of Airspeed. We always said our mission is to help employees feel connected and celebrated, and I think that's the missing link in a lot of companies. I think that especially we found during COVID, if your job is just showing up and doing a bunch of back-to-back Zoom meetings with people you don't feel connected to and a mission you don't feel connected to, then you're just going to go move on to the next highest bidder for your Zoom time. So that's really the differentiation. I think that's what really sets great companies and great teams apart.
Absolutely. And I want to dig in more into that. But before we get there, tell us about yourself. Like, how did you arrive to where you are today with Airspeed?
Sure. So my Airspeed journey was, I've been a serial entrepreneur. My last company was acquired by LinkedIn back in 2015, and I ran the Sales Navigator group. It's the version of LinkedIn for salespeople for about 4 years. Was kind of, getting bored. Didn't have my next startup idea yet. Salesforce came calling and asked me to be the GM of Sales Cloud. And I said, well, that might be interesting. So I started in February of 2020. And 6 weeks later, the world looked like this. And I had met maybe like 10% of my team. So we did all the same stuff everybody tried. We tried Zoom happy hours and Zoom yoga and lots of new Slack channels and more all hands meetings and all that stuff. And in the process of witnessing all of this, I kind of just realized that all of this culture stuff was just scattered all over the place. It was sitting in, Google Drive folders for all hands meetings, or, Slack is kind of like a river that we're just the kind of stuff washes downstream, never to be found again, oftentimes. And kind of realized there was a missing piece, especially in this new world of, more remote or hybrid work. So we decided to set out and kind of build an operating system for culture and take all these moments in an employee's journey from when they first, come onto the company, or even before they join the company, to when they're alumni of the company, and try to have software help along the way.
I love that. And Doug, one thing I just want to get into more is this element of recognition and celebration, because
Yeah.
65% of employees haven't received any form of recognition for good work in the last year, which
Oh
is
my
an
goodness.
astounding statistic to me.
Wow.
So, can you tell us a little bit about, one is, why aren't leaders giving folks recognition? And then how do we start to bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's a great point. And the way that we built our software was like all the things that it used to do in the physical world. Like, how do we not just in the remote world? And frankly, by the way, we found all the things that we're talking here are equally applicable whether you're in the office 5 days a week or 0 days a week or anywhere in between. But it was just kind of like, how do you help people do the right thing? So recognition is a great example. At LinkedIn, we used to do this senior leadership meeting where once a week, where you go around the room and give a shout out to another person or team. But oftentimes that person wasn't even in the room. So the team or the person never even heard the recognition. And there was so much volume of activity. I think most people have the right intention, and there's just so much other stuff going on. So one of the things that we found software can be good at is doing things like, hey, let me nominate somebody for recognition, or let me queue up some recognition to somebody when a trigger has happened, when a deal is closed over a certain amount or a certain amount of code commits have completed. So how do we help a manager do the right thing? And then how do we, as you said, how do we just make people aware of stuff? Like, here's 3 people on your team that haven't received any recognition from you in the last 6 months, right? So I think that's really important. What's also really key for me is making it genuine. So I think the thing that software can't replace is human empathy. It can't if something is just an automated bot that just says congratulations, Rob. It's your there's no emotion attached to that. It's actually almost worse than getting no recognition. So I think those two things have to come together, which is, how do you help people remember to give recognition at the right time? And the immediacy of it is really important. Like, something just happened, give it now. And then how do you do it in a way that's really genuine?
I love this. I want to dig in, since you're such an expert in terms of engagement practices. We were just talking about this in one of our previous interviews, how, engagement is at 33%, Gallup's most recent research suggests. What are some of the things that leaders are continuing to do wrong here in 2024 in terms of why those engagement scores continue to be so low?
It's interesting so my last company, FlipTop, was pretty small. We were about a 30-person company when we got acquired by LinkedIn, and that's a 10,000 plus person organization at the time. And I think the biggest aha moment for me in the first few months there was watching how deliberate they were about cascading communications. So you would see things start at the executive suite level about, here's what we're going to do for the year, here's what we're going to do for the quarter, here's always repeating the vision and the mission, and watching that cascade down in a very deliberate way through the organization. I think that what if anything, what COVID taught us is we have to be as deliberate about cascading culture, and I think that one of she's a great HR leader, Pat Waters, who was at LinkedIn and is now at UKG, leading the people function there, has this whole model of how do you have this emotional journey for an employee, and how do you almost think about, okay, how do you make sure they have an interview process where everybody interviews, even if they don't get the job, says, oh my God, that's a great company. That was a great experience. That was a great company. I want to work there. How do you have somebody coming on the first day and saying, oh my God, I'm even more excited about the company now at the end of my first day than I was before the beginning of the day? How do you have somebody in the first 30, 60, 90 days making sure they feel like this company sees me, this company recognizes me, I feel like I have all the resources, I feel like I'm getting to know my teammates? And how does that deepen over time? And then how does that build into a lifelong relationship? LinkedIn had this great phrase called next play, which was kind of recognizing, it's not like you're fired or you quit. It's like, you came and gave us a chapter of your life and hopefully gave us some good service, and we want to maintain that relationship. You're going to go on to do great things, and we want to keep building this full network, very LinkedIn style. So I think that, yeah. That engagement model, I think the engagement stuff is, when somebody is not feeling that connection to, inspiration to the mission, is not feeling connected to their colleagues, they're kind of just in their silo and doing work. Of course, engagement is going to be low. So I think, a very long answer to a short question, but I think it's about being very deliberate around all of these touchstones and milestone points, and making sure you're thinking about that emotional journey that the employee is going on.
That to me is such a powerful framework. I see a lot of folks now with the interviews, especially where they're getting ghosted or they get a job offer and they show up and it's not there, or even the inverse where companies hire them and the people don't show up. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of that. And then even in my career, I've always found the first day was the worst because
Yeah.
it's like, oh, here's like a stack of paperwork. Please sign all this. And then just like, I don't know. But what are some maybe what are some of the considerations for that first day of work?
Yeah, I think part, you mentioned one of it, get as much of that stuff done before you ever show up, right? So we have something where we've always made sure that like all the paperwork's taken care of to the degree which you can, unless you had to sign something in person, which no one needs to anymore. We always, when we were in person, we would do an in-person lunch. Right now we do a virtual lunch. So everybody gets, DoorDash, certificates or Uber Eats certificates and comes in and has, they don't, you don't have to watch people eat for an hour, but you're having a set of conversations. In my old companies, we'd do this. We had 5 questions, and I can't remember all 5, but I think it was like, what was your first concert? What's your, something we'd be surprised to know about you, most embarrassing moments, thing you're most proud of outside of work and your kids. So we had these sets of questions. And it was just a really fun getting to know you moment for the lunch. And I always thought that was like, peak experience. But what I realized is anybody who joined after that person or anybody who wasn't at that lunch never heard those answers. And that person never got to hear the answers of all the people that they were going to be working with. So that was one of the apps we developed at Airspeed. We developed this intros app. So as soon as you join the Slack workspace, you're getting prompted with a set of questions the company has as a standard or the team has a standard, depending on how you want to structure it. And you kind of introduce yourself to the team, and then you get this message back that's like, here's all the people you're going to be working with, and here's how they answered it. So it's actually, again, a better than in real world experience. But that's just a kind of a way to get to, make it personal. And I think I think in work, I've always found the best teams are obviously you start with great people. You've got a very clear sense of direction of where you're going, but there's that kind of like trust layer that builds up over time. And it's about getting to know the person behind the LinkedIn profile. It's about really getting to, there's vulnerability that's being brought to the table where people are kind of, you're getting to understand who they are. And that's really hard to do remotely. We help with our tools, but we still get together face to face. We're getting the team here in Park City in another quarter, just flying everybody in rather than having an office space, because that face to face time really matters. So I think on that first day, clearing as much of the paperwork out as possible, making sure the first meeting you have is with the manager where you're sitting down and saying, here's what the 90-day plan, I've already come with you with a draft of the 90-day plan, but this is a working document. We're going to collaborate on this. And then making sure that they have all the resources, everything's turned on. You're not waiting for, email, Slack, Zoom, all that kind of, everything's kind of all set up for you so you can be productive right away. You've got your laptop before you ever start. And then really making sure that you feel welcome for the team. And we kind of do, we really do almost like exit surveys, like how was your first day? How was your first week? And the goal should be like, you feel like I've kind of come up to speed in that first week. And I've had the first day that made me feel really welcome.
Wow, I love the depth at which you consider the employee experience. It sounds like throughout all of your answers, that's the common thread, right? It's just like really prioritizing and valuing the employee's experience. So I was wondering if you could tell us a story about, one of the companies that you've worked with, that has benefited from the use of Airspeed and how that's helped them to improve their collaboration, their engagement. Yeah, just like their operations as a team. Could you share a testimony?
Yeah.
story?
Yeah, we have a family of 6 apps, and so the goal is you kind of pick and choose what functionality you want. And we have folks who communities get to use it for free. Companies below 50 get to use it for free. Companies above 50 pay a modest fee. But the best companies have embraced most, if not all, of those apps for all of these moments. So we have like the intros app, as I mentioned, for the first day. We use another app called Icebreakers. So we used to do this again, go around the room and say, what's a personal win from last week? And it was great. You got some verbal description and people were engaged. The problem was, again, if you're not in the room where it happens, you don't get to hear that. And it's what I'm telling you. So if I said, I just got a new puppy, or, we just had a baby, and like, you never see visuals. And it took like half an hour. It was like half the meeting, right? To go around the room. So Icebreakers now we use every week, and companies, our best customers use this, where in a weekly meeting, they'll get a notice 24 hours before in Slack. They'll say, ask a question like, what's a personal win for you? They'll get to attach from their phone. They can just go attach photos, videos, stuff like that. I spend like 5 minutes in the beginning of our weekly team meeting going through and say, oh, so-and-so just went to a concert. So-and-so, got a puppy. So like, and you're getting to see these people in a whole new light. So that's another one. There's an app called Maps, where you can kind of see where everybody is, not in real time. We're very careful about privacy, but kind of where people are, their home office, and when they're traveling. And people are using that all the time in big companies to facilitate local meetups when people who are their main office or their main home office is close to each other, or they're traveling, or even some companies have done, hey, we're going to create a budget. If you've got more than X number of people in a certain geographic area, here's your kind of culture budget. You guys can go out for pizza, beer, whatever, once a month, once a quarter. And so they're using the Maps app to help facilitate that and make that happen. I think the shout outs app we use, I mean, you mentioned, Rob, the recognition piece. One of the things that I've had my VP of engineering, for example, do in the past is email me when there's somebody he'd like me to give recognition to. Because what he found is it's, yes, he could do it, but it's even more effective if it's coming from me. So we built that into our shoutouts app. And so the shoutouts app has the notion, I just got one today, where he was like, hey, one of our engineers, Pietro, did an amazing job this weekend. It would be great if you gave him some recognition. And you're basically templatizing how to give great recognition. What did they do? What was the impact? What company values did that represent? So it's all kind of really set up in a simple way to go do it. And if you're really stuck for it, you can go hit a button and help me generate with AI so I can kind of like sound better in it as well, right? So we do that. And then built into that app are things like reminders. Like I've got a reminder for myself, like, hey, I'd like to give a shout out at least once a week. And so it'll send me a Slack message if I haven't given recognition that week. And we also found that on Fridays is, we plotted when people are doing feedback. And Fridays are the peak days for people giving free feedback. So we have this feature you can turn on called Feedback Fridays, where it's like, hey, now's a great time to go recognize your colleagues, and kind of gamify it even a little bit. So that's that one. And then let's see, celebrations is one where we just, every time you've got like work anniversaries and birthdays, you usually have an admin chasing somebody around to sign some digital or physical card. We just put that all on autopilot. It's like, put all the dates into the system, and it automatically chases people around and says, hey, it's Susan's, 4th work anniversary coming up. The thing we're doing there that I think is interesting is don't just say, hey, happy 4th work anniversary, Susan. We ask a question, what's the thing you admire most or you appreciate most about working with Susan? So when you get this work anniversary card, you get like all this love coming your way about like, this is what people actually like about working with you. And then birthdays, you can, attach silly gifts and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's just a flavor of some of our apps and kind of how they all come together. And I think the best companies we find are using, most, if not all of these apps in the flow of this customer journey.
I just have to say it's so fascinating, right? Because we obviously started this show to talk about Leadership 2.0, like upskilling leaders here in 2024, because it's all about the human-centric approach, right? That's new school leadership. And here we have all these apps and all this technology suddenly coming into this space, right? And so I'm just curious, how much of that can technology replace? And if that's the trend in terms of where we're headed. What are the things that us 2.0 leaders really need to hone in on and focus on developing the most that technology can never supplement? What's your
I think, listen, I think it all has, you can't fake this stuff. It has to come from a genuine place of actually caring about employees, actually wanting them to have a great experience, a great journey, of having your own company culture that you're kind of reinforcing at these steps. It's kind of like software is like the Iron Man suit, right? It can help you fly further and faster, but it's not gonna make all the decisions for you. And you wouldn't want it to, because it's not gonna actually feel like genuine leadership, genuine process. So I've had the good fortune in my last, two companies I was at, of working with great leaders like Mark Benioff and Jeff Weiner and Ryan Roslansky at LinkedIn, who were really, if you look at those companies, those are employee first companies. They care deeply about that journey. They care deeply about the mission of the company, not just being about let's make a buck, but let's actually give back as well. And let's, have a higher purpose. And I think that's one of the things to realize for 2.0 leaders these days is, especially if you are one of our advisors, Chris Lockhead, talks about native digitals, analog natives and digital natives. So if you're over 35, like I am, you're probably an analog native, right? If you're under 35, you're a digital native. And that's really important to keep in mind when you're designing these company cultures, because if you're under 35, work is not just a paycheck. It's like, I want to find community there. I want to go find meaning there. I want to find, if I'm choosing between two jobs, those things are going to be, I will actually sacrifice, compensation for having a better sense of mission, better sense of community. And I love that analogy of those kind of two groups. Like the thing Chris said was, if you're over, if I came to your house, and I would probably ring the doorbell. If you're under 35, that seems really rude. Like, I'm just going to text you, I'm in the driveway, right? So, that's a great example of, as leader, you need to think about how are you creating these journeys for, this wide range of needs and desires.
I just have to say, here in Costa Rica, they don't do either. They just honk the car.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I love this. And Doug, I'd love to hear, what do you think leaders need to be good at, or what are the skills they need to develop to be successful in 2024 and beyond, especially taking into account AI. Literally, I got an email 2 days ago, which was hey, Rob, do you want to create a clone of yourself that can provide off-hour coaching to all your clients? And I was like, can they do the Zooms for me?
Soon.
But
yeah.
What are your thoughts?
So I think, listen, I love actually the branding Microsoft did with AI for Copilot, because I think that's the right framework to think about. It's like this augmentation tool, this super suit, as I said. But at the end of the day, it still all comes down to people, right? I think that I give new employees our culture presentation, our values presentation, because it's so personally meaningful to me. And one of the examples I use, that if you remember back to the Enron days, they had their values etched in marble in the lobby, and one of them was integrity, which was bullshit, right? Which was because that's not, words on a plaque don't mean shit, right? It's all about who do you hire and who do you fire as well. And so I think it still comes down to, who are you bringing into your company? And I've over time kind of come up with these 3 tests for this customer journey. So the hiring process, I came up with what I call the awesome test. And so when we interview people, we debrief after their final, group presentation, and we just go, excuse my language, is that person fucking awesome, right? And if you can't say, hell yes, without hesitation, we move on. And we've said goodbye to some amazing people. But if you're not super enthusiastic about that person right away, it's the wrong choice, right? And you're still not gonna bat 1,000, right? But we try to hold that bar really high. Then you want to make sure, I think one of my key jobs is not only, bringing the right people on the bus and getting the wrong people off the bus, but making sure the people on the bus are really engaged and excited, and we're not going to lose good people. So the second test I came up with was what I call the fun test, right? And I just randomly asked people, are you usually in person because I want to see eye contact, are you having fun? And I just found people are shitty at lying about that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you
So if
can't
there's,
fake that till you make it, can you?
so it's one of those things, if their voice goes up an octave or there's a long pause, I'm like, ooh, we have a problem here, and let's
Right.
dig into this and let's try to figure out what to go solve and how to go make that happen. And then the last one I just stole from Netflix. It's called the Keeper Test. And the Keeper Test is, if anybody from your team was going to leave tomorrow, how hard would you fight to keep them? And if the answer is not that hard, you probably should be saying goodbye now. And if the answer is, oh my God, we'd be screwed if that person left, you should figure out what you would do in that situation and do it now. So if you could give them more salary, more stock, more title, more responsibility, whatever, just do it now. Like, don't ever let it get to the point where that person is thinking of leaving, because that person, you would do that anyway. So you might as well, front load it and do it now. So those are kind of the three things. And I think, back to your point, AI is not going to change any of that. AI is going to be just like, we can't imagine the world now, or, my kids, can't believe there was a world before the iPhone and the internet. It's going to be a point where you're like, of course you have an augmented brain called, Chat GPT or whatever it is, right? It's just another tool.
What would you say? Yeah, go
The
ahead.
thing I love about this, Doug, is the one is deliberateness, and like you actually have these things, and the other is the curiosity element, which is like, I'm asking the question about the fun because I want to understand like the root cause of like why they may not be having fun, or why are they having fun, and then I can lean into them to create more of that. And I think that's something, of course, we love this as like the growth mindset, but like unlocking that curiosity as leaders it's phenomenal.
Yeah. And I think, like the problem, culture is this word that's got a lot of baggage, right? Because a lot of people think, especially in Silicon Valley, it's like, oh, that means the ping pong tables and free beer and, whatever. And it's like, that's not culture at all, right? Culture is absolutely about like, am I working with smart people? Am I, being challenged? Am I excited? Do I feel connected to the mission that I'm on? All of these things. And so I think that when I say fun, it's not like work is not supposed to be fun 100% of the time. But in general, if you're not having fun for extended periods of time, I think Steve Jobs said this in his Stanford, commencement keynote. He's like, would used to look in the mirror, and if like, multiple days in a row, am I about to do what I'm really excited to go do? And the answer was no. Like, something's wrong. I gotta go fix something, change something.
What would you say, Doug, to all of our leaders out there listening to this interview right now, thinking, oh, that's all sounds so lovely, but we're in an economic downturn and I don't have the luxury of investing in my people's engagement and happiness and all of these fluffy subjects that these people are talking about right now. This is what we see is tends to be the first thing to go on the chopping block, right? Is like investing in the people. What would you say to those leaders?
I think it's a lot more expensive to replace somebody than nurture and develop them, right? So I think that and again, different industries are different. I happen to live in the world of tech and Silicon Valley, and your intellectual property walks out the door every day, right? And so if you're not engaging them, you're nothing, right? You've got no company if those folks are not interested. So and it's been interesting to me because I'm a huge remote work advocate, although, I like people still. I like, seeing them in person. But this notion of like, hey, we're going to force you to come to the office 3 days a week or 5 days a week just because I think it's going to be higher productivity, kind of crazy. I mean, like, in my experience, like engineers would go home or like, put a tent over their cube so they could be alone, so they could be productive. That's what productivity was. And I think that the question I asked a while ago when Airspeed got started was, if this was what we're doing right now, if this was the default for all work in the past, would we invent the office? And if so, what would it look like? And I guarantee you, it's not rows of cubes with people on Zoom calls, right? It's going to be like, it's like hey, we've got childcare, and you've got a cafeteria, and we've got a restaurant, and we've got these big collaborative meeting spaces. And, that's where face-to-face is really interesting. And I especially with tools like, Slack and huddles and stuff like that, I think there's, a lot more spontaneous stuff than people realize that can happen. But I think people are overstating how much, productivity people got in the office versus how much productivity people get remotely. But ultimately, if you're not investing in these things, you're going to lose your best people over time. And that's going to be more costly than anything else you could do. And it's funny when you look at most HR tech companies, in fact, in boom times, their messaging is more around this, like, hey, build great teams, build. And when it becomes hard, it's like, they flip the messaging to like productivity and all this stuff. It's the same side of the same coin. Right?
Totally. And
So
Doug,
glad you said
just
that.
because you're plugged into big tech, like they've laid off, I don't know, a few 100,000 last year, and you've seen releases already this year about some of these other big companies laying off thousands of folks. Like, how do you think about corporate layoffs? Because I think the data is out that it doesn't really work. However, the stock market does reward companies for laying folks off. So, how do you think about it as a leader when we're hitting potentially some economic uncertainty? Like, how do we think about retention?
Yeah, I think listen, I've gone through. Fortunately, we're pretty lean at Airspeed, so it's not a consideration for us. But I had my first company was during the .com boom, and we, everybody was just throwing money at us, and we got to way too many employees and had to do a pretty significant layoff, and that was the most painful thing I've ever done as a leader in my life. But some companies just grew too fast. I mean, if you raised money in 21, especially at like these crazy valuations, you've got $1 billion plus valuations. What's the phrase right now that I just heard today is unicorps, right? So there's basically companies that were worth $1 billion plus, and there's just no way they're going to get to see that value over time with kind of multiples. And it's funny. I hear some first time entrepreneurs who are like raised money in 21 and are like living now in 23 going like, we're going through these hard times. I'm like, no, this is kind of what normal was. 21 was the outlier in this equation. But I think, listen, sometimes companies grow too fast and have to do layoffs, and I think that's critical. I think the biggest lesson I took away was cut as deep as you possibly can once, right? Because you want to remove uncertainty, and you don't want to keep doing these like, well, here's another 5%, another 5%, another 5%. So that's one. And two is do it really respectfully. I mean, I think that the great companies that I've seen do this well have set up, entire teams to say, here's how we're going to help you find your next job. Here's how we're going to publish people who are there, and really make sure that people can land. Because it is this, I always view this is a lifetime relationship with people. Like, treat people well, because you never know where it's going to come back to you. So I think that's part of it. And I do think, we're going to see more of it, frankly, because I do think one of the impacts of AI will be certain positions will become, you'll be able to do more with fewer people in certain roles. And that's just going to be reality. But just like we transition from agricultural economy to industrial economy, there's going to be, 20 years from now, there'll be a whole bunch of job titles we couldn't even imagine today, where these people are finding different ways of being productive. So, it's certainly not over by any means, but I do think it's not a panacea. I think the key is, if you want to retain the people who are remaining with you, one is make sure they're really clear on the mission. They feel really, like positive about where you're going. And I would say, like, be firm on vision, but flexible on details. So we started out with the same mission I mentioned to you at the beginning of the podcast: help employees feel connected and celebrated. We've taken a little bit twists and turns about like what the product looks like and where we ultimately land. But people have not gotten dejected in that process, because they're like, I know we're still solving the same mission, and that work that I did, it's okay to put on the shelf. I think that so I think that connection to the mission, and back to what we were talking about earlier, making sure that those people who remain feel really connected to each other and supported is also a key part of that process.
Doug, if you could, Yeah,
Um,
go ahead. Add to it. You
no,
saw something else.
I just remembered the one app I wasn't thinking about before. So we have, it's specifically about connection. So my experience at Salesforce, as I said, I had a team of 70, 80 people, and I had only met like a fraction of them. And in my weekly meetings, by definition, I would still meet only a fraction of them, and then I'd have this big group setting for like an all hands. So we've created an app called Coffee Talk inside of Airspeed, where you can basically join a channel in Slack and say, yeah, I want to meet people I don't normally meet with. And you connect your calendar and we look at who you meet with normally. And you can put in information like, hey, I want to meet with people outside of my department, or I want to meet with people in customer support, or like have all those kind of things. And also, here's the kind of stuff that I want to talk about, and choose whether you want to meet 2, 3, 4, 5 people at a time. And it'll automatically schedule on some regular cadence these kind of getting to know you meetings with people who are outside your normal circle. So I think that's also a way to kind of build more of this connective tissue inside the organization.
I love how automation can help keep us primed in terms of the priorities, right? Because it can feel like so much for a leader to have to manage, right? On the people side of things. And so what I love about the technology you've created is it's just makes it impossible for you to miss a beat in terms of the integration of all of those different puzzle pieces where people are concerned. Doug, if you could leave our crowd of leaders with your favorite piece of advice here in January of 2024, what would that advice be?
Wow. So I think that I'm gonna cheat and weave multiple ones together, because I think the first thing is I'm a huge believer in working backwards. So kind of envision where you want to be, whether that's a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, and really try to work backwards into those steps. That's one. And I think that make sure in that journey that everybody else is aligned. So you cannot over communicate enough to that team to know what that journey is going to look like. And then the final thing I think is I think the difference between successful companies and teams and the rest of folks is just perseverance. Just, keep pushing at it.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, we have to ask you our favorite question here on the Leadership Launchpad. What do you want your legacy to be?
Great question. So this is my 4th company that I've done. And my greatest satisfaction is not just that people have made money, investors have made money, employees have made money, but that if you go back at those companies, those people say that was the best place I ever worked. So what I want my legacy to be is a bunch of people who go on to even bigger roles, and say, I want to kind of recreate what I had with Doug back there.
Amazing. That's a true leader, folks. Of course, if you want to find out more about Airspeed, getairspeed.com. You can find it there. And then I've also dropped Doug's LinkedIn in the podcast notes, so you can find him there. Is there anywhere else you want folks to find you?
D@getairspeed.com if you want to contact me directly.
Perfect. We'll drop his email in the podcast notes as well. Obviously, for us, hit subscribe, Leadership Launchpad Project, wherever you're listening to it now, and head on over to elitehighperformance.com/legacy league and check out and sign up to the Legacy League. First 2 months are free. You'll get access to our elite leaders, as well as all of our elite coaches in the locker room and new content, lives. You'll be able to do so much stuff, as well as take a free mini course about developing your own legacy. So just as Doug said, you can start with the end in mind and work your way back. Susan, is there anything you want to leave our folks with today?
I'm just so inspired to see how technology is stepping into this 2.0 space and really helping us to optimize our human-centric approach to leadership. We've got to try this in our locker room, eh, buddy? That's what I've been thinking about.
That's what I've been thinking this whole time.
To Doug, and then plug it into the leadership locker rooms that we're out there serving. I'm so grateful that we met you today, Doug. This is totally a mission that's aligned with the one that we're on, to change the way the game of life, leadership, and business is being played forever through this type of human-centric approach.
Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. And I just want to echo this, right? Is I think right now we're in this period of time where there's a lot of uncertainty around AI in the future and technology. And some of it can be probably used for bad, and some of it can also be used for good. And I think where Doug was hit the nail on the head, right? Is this is the Iron Man suit for leaders. And this is the ability for you to increase your effectiveness while still having the empathy and the human connection and all these skills that you've developed. And I think I see this as like, for me, is yes, I forget sometimes to give recognition. I forget to do these things. But if I'm now primed by Slack to say, hey, Rob, you got to do this, then I still am going to do it in the way that I've always done it, in this empathetic way. Just now I don't forget. And I think this is the key. And even that coffee one, I love that. I mean, of course, our company is very small, so it doesn't really necessarily apply as much. But I was thinking back when I was working in big corporate, is like, I would have loved to have this as a way to meet folks that I never would have met. And I think that I mean, I'm absolutely on board with this. We're going to talk after this about how we can get it too. And Doug, it's been an amazing pleasure to connect with you. And of course, we'd love to have you back to chat more, maybe in later 2024.
Love
And
that.
yeah, folks,
All right.
thank you so
Thanks,
much
everyone.
for listening. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.